Girl gives birth to a mermaid instead of a baby. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The air in the small hospital room was thick with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. Sarah, a petite young woman with soft hazel eyes, lay on the hospital bed, her breaths ragged and shallow. The labor had been long and grueling, and the doctors were beginning to exchange worried glances. Outside, the storm raged on, with sheets of rain hammering against the windows. Sarah's mother, Diane, paced anxiously across the room, her hands clasped together tightly. "This isn't normal," she muttered under her breath. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." "Mrs. Green," the nurse said soothingly, placing a reassuring hand on Diane's arm, "everything is under control. Labor can sometimes take longer, especially for a first-time mother." But Diane wasn't convinced. She glanced at the monitors, where Sarah's vitals displayed erratic patterns. Deep down, Diane felt an unshakable unease that had started months ago when Sarah first announced her pregnancy. It wasn't just the announcement that had surprised Diane. It was the circumstances. Sarah had returned from a solo vacation on a remote coastal island several weeks before telling her mother she was expecting. Diane remembered how Sarah had seemed distant and withdrawn upon her return. She attributed it to post-vacation blues, but as time went on, Sarah's behavior only grew more peculiar. "I met someone there," Sarah had confessed one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something special?" Diane had pressed for details, but Sarah had been cryptic. All she would say was that it was a fleeting connection, one that had left her with a profound sense of belonging. Diane dismissed it as a summer fling, something Sarah would eventually move past. But now, as she stood by her daughter's bedside, Diane couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The doctors continued to work diligently, their faces masked with professional composure. Sarah let out a piercing cry, her body writhing in pain as another contraction gripped her. Diane rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Diane whispered, her voice trembling. "Just a little longer." "But I can't," Sarah panted, tears streaming down her face. "It feels different." "It's not normal, Mom." Her words sent a chill down Diane's spine. She tried to brush it off as the irrational fear of a woman in labor, but deep down, she knew Sarah was right. Nothing about this pregnancy had been normal. From the moment Sarah discovered she was pregnant, there had been anomalies. The ultrasounds showed strange shadows that the doctors couldn't explain. "Probably just a glitch in the equipment," they had said dismissively. But as the months passed, Sarah began experiencing unusual symptoms. Her skin developed a faint shimmer under the sunlight, and she complained of hearing a low, melodic hum whenever she was near water. "It's like music," Sarah had told Diane one evening, her expression a mix of wonder and fear. "I can't explain it, but it's beautiful. Like a lullaby." Diane had laughed nervously, chalking it up to pregnancy hormones. But now, as she watched Sarah struggle through labor, she couldn't help but recall those odd moments with growing unease. Suddenly, the room was filled with a sharp, high-pitched wail. It wasn't Sarah, it was the baby. The sound was unlike anything Diane had ever heard. It was piercing yet oddly melodic, like the cry of a distant sea creature. The medical team froze, their eyes widening in unison. "What's happening?" Diane demanded, her voice trembling. "Why does it sound like that?" The doctor hesitated, his hands trembling as he worked to deliver the baby. "But I don't know," he admitted. "This isn't normal." Sarah let out a final, guttural scream as the baby emerged. The room fell silent, the only sound the steady beeping of the monitors. Diane's heart pounded as she craned her neck to see her grandchild. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw next. The baby wasn't a baby at all, or at least, not entirely. Lying in the doctor's hands was a small, glistening creature. Its upper body resembled that of a human infant, but its lower half was covered in shimmering scales that transitioned into a fish-like tail. The creature blinked up at the doctor with large, luminescent eyes, its tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The room erupted into chaos as the nurses scrambled to process what they were seeing. One of them let out a small scream, dropping the clipboard she was holding. "What is that?" one of the nurses whispered, her voice shaking. "It's my baby," Sarah said weakly, her voice filled with both awe and exhaustion. "It's perfect." Diane felt her knees buckle as she stared at the creature in disbelief. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of hallucination or nightmare. But the weight of the moment, the stunned expressions on the medical team's faces, and the strange, melodic cries of the baby all confirmed that this was no illusion. The doctor quickly regained his composure, wrapping the baby in a towel and placing it on Sarah's chest. Sarah cradled the creature protectively, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, little one," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Diane took a hesitant step forward, her hands trembling. "Sarah, what is this? What's going on?" Sarah looked up at her mother, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "Mom, this is my child. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's mine." The room fell silent again, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air. Diane struggled to process what was happening. Her mind raced with questions. How was this possible? What would people think? But as she looked into her daughter's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in months: pure, unfiltered joy. Despite the shock, despite the impossibility of the situation, Diane felt a small flicker of warmth in her chest. Whatever this creature was, it was clear that Sarah loved it unconditionally. And in that moment, Diane realized that she had a choice. She could either let her fear and disbelief consume her, or she could stand by her daughter and her grandchild. Taking a deep breath, Diane stepped closer to the bed. "What's their name?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I was thinking, Marina." The doctor cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "We need to run some tests," he said carefully, his voice laced with both professionalism and trepidation. "This child is unlike anything we've ever seen. We need to make sure it's healthy." Sarah nodded reluctantly, her arms tightening around Marina protectively. "Okay," she said softly. "But promise me you'll be gentle." As the medical team began their examinations, Diane stood by her daughter's side, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: their lives would never be the same again. As the medical team wheeled Marina to the neonatal unit for further examination, Sarah watched with a mixture of longing and anxiety. She had already grown attached to her newborn, her child, no matter how different. Diane remained by her side, though her face betrayed the whirlwind of emotions she was grappling with. "Do you think she's okay?" Sarah asked softly, her voice trembling. Diane hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The doctors will do their best." "But Sarah," she trailed off, unsure how to voice the questions swirling in her mind. "How is this even possible? What happened on that island?" Sarah stared at her mother for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the door creaked open, and a man in a lab coat stepped inside. "Miss Green," the doctor began, his tone grave, "I need to speak with you about your child." Sarah's heart raced as she sat up straighter in bed. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. The doctor nodded, though his expression remained serious. "Your child is stable, and physically she appears to be healthy. However, there are anomalies we've never encountered before. We need your permission to conduct further tests." "What kind of tests?" Diane interjected, her tone protective. The doctor hesitated. "Genetic analysis, metabolic screenings, and possibly imaging studies to understand her anatomy better. This isn't just about Marina's health, it's about understanding her unique physiology." Sarah's grip on the bed rail tightened. "She's not some experiment," she said firmly. "She's my daughter." The doctor raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your concern, and I assure you, our priority is her well-being. But you must understand, this is unprecedented. Her condition, if I may call it that, could have implications far beyond what we can comprehend." Diane placed a comforting hand on Sarah's arm, trying to calm her daughter. "Sarah, maybe it's worth considering. They might be able to help her." Sarah's eyes darted between her mother and the doctor, her mind racing. She hated the idea of Marina being poked and prodded, but she also knew that refusing medical advice could put her child at risk. After a long pause, she exhaled deeply. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "But I want to be involved every step of the way. No decisions about Marina will be made without my consent." The doctor nodded, scribbling notes on his clipboard. "Understood. We'll start with non-invasive tests and take it from there. Thank you for trusting us." As the doctor left, Sarah sank back into the pillows, exhaustion etched across her face. Diane sat down beside her, her expression unreadable. "I still don't understand, Sarah," Diane said after a moment of silence. "How did this happen? What aren't you telling me?" Sarah closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had known this conversation was inevitable, but she wasn't ready for it. "It's complicated," she began. "I don't even know if you'll believe me." "Try me," Diane said, her tone soft but insistent. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she spoke. "When I was on the island, I met someone. At first, I thought he was just a local, a fisherman or something. But he was different, mysterious. He seemed to know things about me that I'd never told anyone." Diane frowned, her concern growing. "What kind of things?" "Personal things," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My fears, my dreams, even things about you and Dad. It was like he could see into my soul. At first, I was scared, but he had this calming presence. I felt drawn to him." Diane's brow furrowed. "And this man, did he hurt you?" Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No. He was kind, gentle even. He told me he'd been watching over me, that he was drawn to me because I was special." "Special?" Diane repeated, her skepticism evident. Sarah nodded. "He said I had a connection to the ocean, that I was part of something bigger. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but I felt it. Like I belonged there." Diane rubbed her temples, trying to process what she was hearing. "Sarah, this sounds fantastical. Are you sure you weren't just caught up in the moment? Maybe he was a con artist or—" "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "He wasn't like that. And after we connected, I knew something had changed. When I came back home and found out I was pregnant, I knew he had something to do with it." Diane stared at her daughter, the weight of her words sinking in. "Sarah, are you saying this man wasn't human?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I don't know what he was," she admitted. "But I know he wasn't like us." The room fell into an uneasy silence as Diane grappled with the implications of Sarah's confession. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and the doctor returned, a folder in his hand. "We've completed the initial tests," he said, his tone cautious. "And there's something you need to see." Sarah and Diane exchanged a nervous glance as the doctor handed them the folder. Inside were images from Marina's scans. Sarah's breath hitched as she saw the intricate structures of her child's anatomy. Her tail was not just a random mutation, it was fully functional, complete with muscles, fins, and scales that shimmered even on the black and white printout. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. The doctor cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "We also conducted a genetic analysis. Her DNA is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's a combination of human and something else." "Something else?" Diane repeated, her voice shaking. The doctor nodded. "We're not sure what it is yet, but it's clear that Marina is unique in ways we can't fully understand." Sarah's grip on the folder tightened as she absorbed the doctor's words. "What does this mean for her future?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. The doctor hesitated. "It's hard to say. Physically, she appears healthy, but there may be challenges ahead. Her unique physiology could make it difficult for her to adapt to certain environments. We'll need to monitor her closely." Sarah nodded, determination etched across her face. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her," she said firmly. "She's my daughter, and I won't let anyone treat her like she's less than that." Diane placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. We'll face whatever comes together." As the doctor left the room, Sarah leaned back against the pillows, her heart heavy but resolute. She didn't know what the future held for her and Marina, But one thing was certain, she would fight for her child, no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a blur as Sarah remained in the hospital, recovering from the physical toll of childbirth. Marina stayed in the neonatal unit, surrounded by doctors and nurses who treated her with equal parts awe and caution. Sarah visited her daughter frequently, each visit strengthening her bond with the extraordinary child she had brought into the world. But outside the hospital walls, the world was beginning to take notice. A nurse, unable to contain her curiosity, had shared a blurry photo of Marina online. The image, showing the tiny mermaid-like baby with her shimmering tail, went viral almost instantly. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing Marina the miracle mermaid baby. At first, Sarah had no idea what was happening. It wasn't until Diane showed her a news clip on her phone that the gravity of the situation sank in. "They're calling her a scientific marvel," Diane said, scrolling through the comments. "Some people think it's a hoax. Others, well, let's just say not everyone's reactions are positive." Sarah's stomach churned as she read the hateful comments alongside the supportive ones. Words like freak and abomination leapt off the screen, searing into her mind. She slammed the phone down, her hands trembling with anger. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't want Marina to grow up being treated like some kind of sideshow attraction." Diane placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll handle this," she said firmly. "But first, we need to figure out how that photo got out. The hospital should have protected your privacy." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. I'm not letting anyone exploit my daughter." Later that day, Sarah confronted the hospital administration. The chief administrator, a composed woman with a clipboard, apologized profusely for the breach of confidentiality. "We're conducting an internal investigation," she assured Sarah. "Rest assured, the individual responsible will be held accountable." "That's not enough," Sarah shot back. "I want Marina's privacy guaranteed. No more leaks, no more photos. She's just a baby. She deserves to grow up without the world gawking at her." The administrator nodded, clearly flustered. "Of course, Ms. Green. We'll implement stricter security measures immediately." But as Sarah walked back to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. The world had already seen Marina, and there was no going back. By the time Sarah returned to her room, Diane was waiting for her with another update. "You need to see this," she said, handing Sarah her phone. The screen displayed a headline from a major news outlet: "Mermaid baby sparks debate over ethics and science." "They're not just talking about Marina," Diane said. "They're talking about you. People are demanding to know who the father is, how this happened. Some are even suggesting that you experimented on yourself." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you kidding me? How can they say that?" Diane sighed. The internet thrives on speculation. The more outrageous the theory, the more attention it gets. Sarah sank onto the bed, her head in her hands. "What am I supposed to do, Mom? How do I protect Marina from all of this?" Diane sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You take control of the narrative," she said. "If you stay silent, people will fill in the blanks with their own stories. But if you speak up, you can set the record straight." Sarah looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You really think that'll work?" Diane nodded. "You don't have to tell them everything. Just enough to show that you're a mother protecting her child, not some mad scientist." Sarah thought about it for a long moment. She hated the idea of putting herself in the public eye, but Diane was right. The only way to protect Marina was to take control of the situation. The next day, Sarah reached out to a trusted journalist, someone Diane had recommended from a local news station. They arranged for a private interview, one where Sarah could share her story on her own terms. The interview took place in a small, quiet studio. The journalist, a kind-eyed woman named Rebecca, greeted Sarah warmly. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Rebecca said. "I promise to handle your story with care." Sarah nodded, her nerves evident. "I just want people to understand that Marina is a baby, not a spectacle." As the cameras rolled, Sarah spoke candidly about her pregnancy, her love for her daughter, and her fears for Marina's future. She avoided discussing the mysterious man she had met on the island, focusing instead on her commitment to giving Marina a happy, normal life. When the interview aired, it quickly went viral. While some people continued to speculate and criticize, many others rallied around Sarah and Marina, offering messages of support and encouragement. But the attention also brought unexpected visitors. One afternoon, as Sarah sat by Marina's incubator, a man in a sleek suit entered the neonatal unit. He introduced himself as Dr. Julian Ross, a marine biologist from a prestigious research institute. "I've been following your story, Ms. Green," he said, his tone respectful. "I'd like to help." Sarah frowned, her guard instantly up. "Help how?" Dr. Ross hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your daughter is extraordinary, and not just because of her appearance. She represents an unprecedented opportunity to understand the mysteries of our world. I'd like to study her, with your permission, of course." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Study her? She's not a lab rat, Dr. Ross. She's my daughter." Dr. Ross raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your concern, and I assure you, my intentions are purely scientific. But think about what this could mean, for her, for science, for humanity." Sarah shook her head firmly. "My priority is Marina's well-being, not your research." Dr. Ross nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. "I respect your decision, Ms. Green. But if you ever change your mind, please don't hesitate to reach out." As he left, Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of anger and fear. She knew that Dr. Ross wouldn't be the last person to approach her with such a request. Protecting Marina was going to be a lifelong battle, one she was determined to fight. As Sarah looked down at her sleeping daughter, she whispered softly, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll always keep you safe." The following days at the hospital became a whirlwind of activity as the outside world grew more obsessed with Marina's story. News vans parked outside, reporters tried to sneak in for exclusive photos, and the hospital staff worked tirelessly to maintain privacy. Sarah stayed in Marina's room as much as possible, refusing to leave her daughter's side. One evening, Diane returned to the hospital with a stack of papers. "Sarah, you need to see this," she said, placing them on the table. "These are legal documents I had drawn up. They'll protect Marina from exploitation and ensure her privacy is maintained." Sarah scanned the documents, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. I wouldn't have known where to start." Diane smiled. "You don't have to do this alone, honey. We're in this together." The documents were just the beginning. Diane also arranged for a security team to be stationed at the hospital, ensuring that no one could get close to Marina without Sarah's permission. It was an expensive measure, but one that brought Sarah a sense of relief. But even with these precautions, the pressure continued to mount. Offers flooded in from all directions. Television networks wanted interviews, book publishers proposed memoir deals, and even toy companies pitched ideas for Marina-inspired dolls. Sarah turned them all down. "She's not a commodity," Sarah told Diane one night. "She's my child. I won't let them turn her into some kind of brand." Diane nodded in agreement. "You're doing the right thing. Marina's well-being comes first." Despite Sarah's efforts, the public fascination with Marina showed no signs of waning. One day, as Sarah was feeding Marina in the neonatal unit, a nurse entered with an apologetic look. "There's someone here to see you," the nurse said. "Sissy's her father." Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" The nurse hesitated. "He matches the description you gave of the man you met on the island." "Should I ask him to leave?" Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't seen or heard from the mysterious man since the night they had parted ways. Part of her had assumed she never would. But now, here he was. "No," Sarah said finally. "I'll see him." A few minutes later, the man stepped into the room. He looked just as Sarah remembered, tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on Marina. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice low and reverent. Sarah held Marina protectively. "Why are you here?" The man met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Because I owe you an explanation." He took a seat, his movements deliberate. "I told you I was different, Sarah. But I never told you how different. My people have lived in the ocean for centuries, hidden from humanity. We've adapted to the water in ways you can't imagine. Sarah stared at him, trying to process his words. So, Marina is part of your world? He nodded. She's the bridge between our worlds. She carries the legacy of both. The man went on to explain that his people had long been wary of humans, fearing exploitation and misunderstanding. But Marina's existence changed everything. She's proof that our worlds can coexist, he said. That we can find common ground. Sarah shook her head, her emotions a storm of confusion and anger. You left me, she said. You didn't tell me the truth, and now Marina is caught in the middle. I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now that I was wrong. Sarah took a deep breath, her maternal instincts overriding her anger. If you want to be a part of Marina's life, you need to earn that right. She's not just your legacy, she's my daughter. The man nodded, his expression earnest. I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes. As the days turned into weeks, the man, whose name, Sarah learned, was Cale, proved his commitment. He stayed at the hospital, keeping a low profile to avoid attracting attention. He helped Sarah navigate the challenges of raising a child like Marina, sharing insights into their unique physiology and needs. Slowly, Sarah began to trust him. She saw the love in his eyes when he looked at Marina, the way he spoke to her in soft, melodic tones that seemed to calm her instantly. For all his faults, Cale was trying, and that mattered. But the world outside the hospital was less forgiving. News of Cale's presence leaked, sparking a fresh wave of speculation. Reporters speculated about his origins, with some claiming he was an escaped experiment and others calling him a hoax. Sarah knew they couldn't stay in the hospital forever. Marina needed a safe, stable environment to grow up in, one far away from the prying eyes of the media. With Cale's help, Sarah made plans to leave the city. They found a secluded coastal property where Marina could live in peace, surrounded by nature. The house was equipped with a private lagoon, allowing Marina to explore her aquatic instincts safely. Diane joined them, bringing her unwavering support and determination. Together, they formed a tight-knit family, united by their love for Marina and their commitment to giving her the best life possible. As they settled into their new home, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. She had gone from an ordinary woman to the mother of an extraordinary child, facing challenges she never could have imagined. But through it all, her love for Marina had been her guiding light. And as she watched Marina splash happily in the lagoon, her laughter echoing across the water, Sarah knew she had made the right choices. No matter what the world thought, Marina was her miracle, and nothing would ever change that. Months passed, and life in their secluded coastal home began to feel like a dream. The outside world faded into a distant hum, their lives defined by the gentle rhythm of the waves and the unbreakable bond they shared. Marina thrived in her new environment, her unique abilities blossoming under the care and love of her family. She could swim with an ease that defied nature, her small tail glimmering under the sunlight as she darted through the clear lagoon waters. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Sarah, Cale, and Diane sat on the shore, watching Marina play. She had discovered a school of fish and was chasing them in circles, her laughter ringing out like music. Cale turned to Sarah, his expression soft. She's incredible. She's everything I dreamed she would be. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She's more than we could have ever imagined. Diane, sitting beside them, chuckled. She's a handful too. She's going to keep us on our toes. They laughed together, the weight of their journey easing with each shared moment of joy. But even in this peaceful haven, Sarah knew the world beyond their sanctuary wouldn't stay silent forever. The media had moved on to other stories, but the fascination with Marina's existence hadn't disappeared. Sooner or later, questions would resurface, and they would have to decide how to protect her from the prying eyes of the world. One night, Cale approached Sarah as she stood by the lagoon, lost in thought. I've been thinking, he said, his voice quiet. Marina has a gift. She's not just a part of our world, she has the potential to unite them. Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowing. You mean, show her to the world? Cale nodded. Not yet, but someday. When she's ready. If we guide her, She could be a bridge between our worlds, a symbol of what's possible when we set aside fear and embrace understanding. The idea sent a shiver through Sarah. She had spent every moment since Marina's birth trying to shield her from the world's gaze. The thought of exposing her to it, even for something as noble as unity, felt almost unbearable. "She's just a child," Sarah said. "She deserves to grow up without that kind of pressure." "And she will," Kale said gently. "But when the time comes, we have to let her decide. It's her life, her future." The years passed, and Marina grew into a vibrant, curious, and compassionate child. She loved the ocean as much as she loved the land, moving between the two with a grace that took Sarah's breath away. She asked endless questions about the world beyond their home, her curiosity as boundless as the sea. One day, as they sat together on the shore, Marina turned to Sarah. "Mom, why do we live here? Why don't we go out into the world?" Sarah hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because the world isn't always kind, Marina. People don't always understand things that are different." Marina considered this, her small face thoughtful. "But I'm not different. I'm just me." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she hugged her daughter tightly. "You're right," she whispered. "You're perfect just as you are." As Marina's questions grew, so did Sarah's resolve. She realized Kale was right. Someday, Marina would have to make her own choices. But for now, she would do everything in her power to give her the freedom to grow, to discover who she was, and to decide how she wanted to share her light with the world. And as they stood together on the shore, the waves lapping at their feet and the stars reflecting in the water, Sarah knew one thing for certain. No matter what the future held, Marina would always be loved.